So I wanted to share my experience of some of the research that I've been doing in cycling in Irish towns, but particularly looking at schools, and partially because, first of all, I think by focusing on young people, we're actually investing in the future. And secondly, schools are a great generator of short journeys. So if we're looking about changing behaviour, we know that one of the things that's hugely important is addressing the short journeys. So as Rose mentioned, I'm doing my PhD in WIT. That's with Niamh Murphy and Barry Lamb, who've been working in active transport and smarter travel for quite a long period of time, and it's co-funded by Kilkenny County Council, so I'm working very closely with Kilkenny County Council. And I suppose why the urgency, because this work has been ongoing for a while in Kilkenny. Sorry, now I'm just skipping through some slides there. I'll go back here. So why the urgency now? As we know, this work has been happening in Kilkenny since about 2009, when the Smarter Travel Initiative started. But what we can see if we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, if we look at the red line there, that's our transport emissions, and the transport emissions have been rising steadily and are now make up a much greater share of our carbon dioxide emissions. So if we look at the graph starts from 1990, and we can see there's a very steep rise in the transport emissions up until, I suppose, around 2007, and then we see it starting to go back downwards for the which was due to the recession, and it's starting to creep back up again, and this is even with a greater share of electric vehicles. So we know that electric vehicles are not going to be the answer to our greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to start looking at active travel. When we look at schools in particular, when we look at schools in particular, we can see from 1996, over 40% of secondary school students used to cycle to school in Kilkenny. So now those percentages are slightly higher than the national average, but it's just over 3% in Kilkenny. And like Robert said, there's way more boys cycling than girls as well. And this about corresponds to the rise in cars. So why active travel? As we said, one of the huge benefits of active travel is that, as well as reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, there's huge health benefits. And that has been mentioned by many of the parents and the children in the videos earlier on. So I think children and adults are aware of this, and it's about giving people the opportunity to experience it. We know there's a huge economic cost to rising physical inactivity. We know that some of the health benefits include cardiovascular and metabolic health, healthy bones and muscle development, better concentration spans and academic performance, which is important for school, overall life satisfaction, and reduced feelings of anxiety and depression, and improved quality of life and sleep. And as some of the parents summed up in the earlier videos, it's just a fantastic way for children to start their day. One of the things that we can't forget about is the air pollution, particularly around schools with idling cars. So we actually have a huge problem in Ireland with respiratory diseases, and it leads to 1 in 5 deaths in Ireland and 14.3% of all inpatient hospitalisations. And this is even higher for emergency hospitalisations. We have one of the highest rates of asthma in the world, so 21.5% of our children and 79.4% of our adults. Because asthma starts early in life, it has a high lifetime burden as well. So it's something that we live with for our life. So if we look at these two pictures here, what environment do we want our children to experience on their way to school? I think that's not all. There's lots of other benefits with active travel as well. First of all, active travel is free. So sometimes we forget about the percentage of people that don't have cars and about the car dependent and people that are sometimes forced into owning cars because there is no other options. So active travel is free, it's low cost. It's also accessible. And this is a photograph here of one of the parents going to the Gaelscoil, where we met Sean O'Harrigan, the principal there earlier in one of the videos. And he has a motorised wheelchair, but he accompanies his children to school every day on their bikes or on the days that they cycle. And that's what I mean by it's accessible. So our environment is much more accessible. Active travel can be integrated into our daily lives. So it's not another burden, it just becomes part of our lives. There's more time in the outdoors. It allows us to reclaim the streets so that the streets are for people rather than thoroughfares for cars. And this allows us to build communities. What we do is we meet people on the way to school, we talk to people, and there's lots of opportunity for connections. So what can we do then if we're looking at schools? Well, as I suppose, as spoken about earlier by Sean, we had some schools in Kilkenny that were leading the way with cycling, and we had other schools who identified real issues. And we had one school in particular, St. Canice's Primary School, one of the largest primary schools in Kilkenny, who were situated between two very busy roads. And they had identified a huge problem in their school, and surveys with the students found that they just did not feel safe enough. So we needed to get everyone together to address this problem, because this wasn't a problem that the school can address on their own. So yes, we needed the school, we needed the interest from the school, the board of management, the principal, the Green Schools team, the parents associations, but we also needed the Kilkenny County Council, we needed An Garda Síochána, we needed our volunteers. The NTA were very supportive, and I explain some of the roles of these people as I go through it. And we also, surprisingly enough, needed to bring on board Kilkenny Agricultural Society. So, as I said, the problem that they identified was the lack of space for walking and cycling. Because the school was situated between these two busy roads, there's a huge amount of car traffic. So this was the circle that they identified, that because there was increasing number of cars, this vicious circle was happening on the school grounds. The more cars that were there, the less people walked and cycled, causing more cars and increased car dependency and a fear of walking or cycling. So we actually needed to make space, first of all, to allow people to walk or cycle. So we developed a little communication campaign, and some of you may be familiar with Cartoon Saloon, who are Oscar-nominated animation company in Kilkenny. And this is their little characters there, Dorg Fandango on his bike. So we created these signs for outside the school gate: please do not park here. But what was a crucial part of it is we did need to find a solution for people who were travelling that bit further or who needed to bring their cars to school. So with that, then we created a park and stride zone, and that's where the Kilkenny Agricultural Society came in, because they owned land quite close to the school, maybe 200 or 300 metres from the school, that contained plain pitches but had empty car parking spaces during the day. And they worked very closely with us to allow this to be used as a park and stride. So then we produced our map for the school, and if you can see the little green zone in the map, so the green is the ped shed, which is a 1 kilometre area around the school, and the NTA produced this for the school. That this is so the message going home to the parents and to the students was that if you lived inside the ped shed, please walk or cycle to school. And then if you live outside the ped shed, please park away from the school, use the park and stride, and then walk or scoot or cycle the rest of the distance to school. So this was actually a message that was quite strong, and I think the children really liked this message. If you live outside, if you live inside the green area, you have to walk and cycle to school as much as you can. And I think it's very important that children have the facts as well when they're children and parents when they're making the decisions. So this, I suppose, then is some of the little success stories that we had here. So there was huge engagement from the parents, and the walking and cycling to school was really promoted by the school and taken on board. But the park and stride was probably critical in this case. But something else then, if you look at those photographs as well, you can see that in some cases the footpath is quite narrow, and there is a cycle lane there. There's only a white painted line on the road. So this led to some further problems here. So if we look at our next little photograph here, this was a photograph of the school in the mornings. So unfortunately, the white cycle lanes didn't mean a whole lot to motorists. So to counteract that, then we actually Kilkenny Cycling and Walking Campaign came on board, and we actually got Garda traffic cones, and we started off with a trial which lasted for about 6 weeks of actually coning off the cycle lane outside the school. And the effect, that was so effective that the council then came on board and they installed the temporary bollards outside the school. So if you look at the bollards on the top of the picture, unfortunately we don't have those in Kilkenny. but they're installed in some of the schools around Dublin, and they send a very strong message that this is a children's area. So going forward, that's the type of segregation that we would like to see outside of the schools in Kilkenny. And it does create that safe school zone, and that's exactly what we were looking for. We didn't have the option of school streets, which was mentioned earlier, which is a full street closure, but we definitely wanted to focus on creating that safe school zone. So I suppose some of the key learnings, the first thing was that we needed to reduce the traffic in the school environment before we could promote walking and cycling. The second thing was that we wanted to engage people early, so to explain why, to ask for cooperation from the parents and the students. We needed the engineering teams involved. We needed to explain the concept of the school streets, in this case, the school zones. Traffic calming is really important, demarcation, so people know that they're coming into a zone for children. And lots of encouragement, signage, volunteers, and then some challenges to encourage children to cycle to school. As I said, we did also have to use enforcement, Garda cones, volunteers in high vis, and then eventually the bollards and actually some light segregation. Unfortunately, with the secondary schools, they when the surveys were conducted, the traffic again was given as a main reason, but it was a huge challenge at the time, was the weight of the school bags. So I know with COVID, people had limited access to lockers, but it was certainly identified as an issue among secondary schools that there's limited locker space anyway, or limited storage space. So even if they are cycling to school, there isn't the same storage space for cycle helmets, any cycling gear, wet gear, and the heavy bags is an obstacle as well. So like Rob's presentation as well, there's a lot of issues to be explored in the secondary schools, but I think if we don't have the infrastructure and the support in place in the secondary schools, such as the parking, additional storage and showers, it's probably a prerequisite for a lot of the schools. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present.